Welcome once again to your FR class. Thank you very much for joining me on this very important class discussion on your online tuition support. Today I want to focus on the regulatory framework. The regulatory framework. To regulate simply means to control in our case. And of course, the framework simply means a system of ideas. Now, the learning outcomes, after we are done with our discussion, we need to be able to discuss the key influences on the form and content of financial reporting information. We need to discuss the key stages of the IFRS standard formulation process. Now, perhaps we can start with the question, why regulate financial reporting practice? Why regulate the financial reporter? Well, we regulate accountants, or accountants needs to be regulated in order to secure public interest and promote ethical behavior among members of the accountancy profession. So regulation speaks to the fact that accountants occupy positions of public trust, and therefore they are supposed to be seen to be regulated by a set of rules. I'd like to progress. So as a chartered accountant, you're supposed to know certain things when we are preparing the financial statements. You see, you don't just prepare the financial statements from the gut feeling. You need to know certain things. For instance, you need to know the law of your country. In our nation, for instance, we have got the tax law. We have got pay as you earn. We have got NAPSA contributions. As an accountant, you need to know international financial reporting standards. These shall have a bearing upon your work. You need to know how to treat business transactions, financial transactions, in accordance with acceptable financial reporting standards. You need to know the conventions. You see, you need to know best practice, generally accepted accounting practice. You need to know the stock exchange requirements. If you are an accountant who works for a listed firm, you need to know these things. Even those accountants who work for private firms, which are not listed, they still need to know these important stock exchange rules so that they can give competent advice to investors out there. We need to know certain benchmarks as mentioned there. But of course, you will never find everything in the books you read. Therefore, it will be very important also to use judgment, to use professional, judgment on certain matters. For instance, estimating the useful life of assets. For instance, coming up with the allowance for receivables. One needs to use judgment, even in determining the warranty provision liability. Now, we have in our world a board which is known as the International Accounting Standard Board. And this board is prominent, is conspicuous, is known for the formulation of financial reporting standards. This board promotes the use of IFRS in different nations, of course. This board seeks to harmonize the international financial reporting standards with local standards, of course, subject to the sovereign preference of sovereign nations. This board is there to address financial reporting needs of emerging markets. So this board falls under the auspices of a supervisory body, which is known as the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. Last time I checked, I saw that they had 22 trustees. If that has changed, I cannot be surprised. But the foundation, trustees are there to appoint, they're there to fund, and they're there to monitor the work of the International Accounting Standards Board. Now, we also need to know certain things, of course, that this board is supported by two supporting organs, the International Financial Reporting Interpretations Committee, as well as the International Financial Reporting Advisory Council. The Interpretation Committee is there to improve existing standards. They're there to make pronouncements on how to use standards, especially standards that are new. Then the International Financial Reporting Standards Advisory Council is there to provide advice to the board on the impact of its agenda. So I hope that you can see that they act as a forum through which the board can interact with the outside world. Now, it is also important to have an idea of the process of formulating a standard, what goes into that process. For instance, so we must have what we call a technical committee that primarily serves the purpose of giving us guidance on how to come up with a standard. So the first step, of course, is to deal with the establishment of a technical committee, which of course should give us guidance on how to go about formulating a new standard. A technical committee, of course, should be composed of experts. One of them should be an accountant. The technical committee's job or mandate will be to come up with a discussion paper which should be available to the public for their input. Once the discussion paper has been availed to the public for their input, their views, their inputs must be incorporated in order for us to come up with what we call an exposure draft. Exposure draft is an advanced stage of the standard formulation process. Once we have that, we know that we're just one step away from having a new standard. Upon the approval of the majority members of the ISB, a standard can come into full force. So you don't need to know, the minute detail of this process, but you need to know these 4 many stages so that you can have a chance of succeeding if they ask a question on this particular, important, topic. Now, we have in the world the two extremes of standards, principle-based standards as well as the rules-based standards. I think a hybrid could help us. The International Accounting Standards Board develops what we call principle-based standards, and the Financial Accounting Standards Board of America develops what we call rules-based standards. A principle can be applied in any situation. It tends to be flexible, but a rule is rigid. It's applicable in specific situations. Principles tend to be summarized, but rules tend to be detailed. You don't have to comply with the principle. You can explain where you don't comply with the principle standard, but a rules-based standard must be complied with. So we see finally that a rules-based standard leaves less room for judgment, but a principle-based standard allows room for judgment to be applied. So thank you very much. I'd like you to ask questions if you have got any on the regulatory framework. I thought it wise also to look at just about 3 questions for us to have strong finishing to this particular important discussion. I hope my revision kit is already on there. Yeah, I think I have to go all the way so that we can help one another. Okay, so you can drop me message if at all you have got a question on any of the items that we have discussed. So let me go to those questions and try to see if we can help each other from there. Question 14 says the process of developing an international financial reporting standard involves a number of stages. Following receipts and review of comments on a discussion paper, what will be the next step undertaken by the ISB? I think that's straightforward. We are from reading the exposure draft stage. Then 15 says, which of the following would not be an advantage of adapting IFRS? Well, IFRS encourage, comparability of accounting information, so that's not the answer. We're looking for what is not the answer. Cross-border listing is encouraged, for public listed companies. Transfer of labor in D, of course, is facilitated, but I think it is not true to say accountants and auditors would have more defense in case of litigation if they apply IFRS, because IFRS allows room for judgment. Okay, so the last question, which two of the following statements regarding systems of regulation of accounting is or true? So 2. One says a rules-based system will require more detailed regulations than a principle-based system. I think that is correct. Then 2 says a principle-based system would tend to give rise to a larger number of accounting standards. That's not correct. Then the next one says the rules-based system seeks to cover every eventuality. That is also correct. And then lastly, a rules-based system requires the exercise of more judgment. That is not correct. Less judgment is applied here. So we go for option 1 and option 3. Thank you very much for listening in. I'd like to hear from you if you have got any questions.